Over 90% of deaf children are born to parents who cannot speak their first language. This disconnect can trigger a silent crisis of development and emotion. But when a breakthrough finally comes, it can shatter the strongest facade. Even one belonging to a man who built his life on control, now crumbling behind an observation window as his son's small hands form a single, devastating word: Papa. This is the story of Alina Rossi, a speech therapist tasked with a nearly impossible mission: to reach a boy locked in silence within a home governed by fear and absolute control. Her client is Leo, a profoundly deaf 4-year-old. His father is Alessio Conti, a man whose name commands the city's underworld. For months, Alina worked, seeing no progress, until a single session changed everything. But unlocking a child's voice in a world built on secrecy comes with a dangerous price. What happens next reveals a truth more powerful than any crime family's code. Alina Rossi entered the field for a deeply personal reason. Her younger cousin, Marco, was born deaf. She saw firsthand the isolation that came with language deprivation and the transformative power of early intervention. By 28, she'd built a reputation at the Clark School for Hearing and Speech, known for her patience and a methodology that blended rigorous auditory therapy with the full embrace of sign language. She believed in giving children a complete linguistic toolbox. Her caseload was typical: children from anxious, loving families striving to bridge a gap they never anticipated. Then, the referral arrived. It came not from a hospital or a pediatrician, but through a labyrinth of intermediaries. The client was listed only as LC, a 4-year-old male with bilateral profound sensory neural hearing loss. No prior intervention. The proposed fee for in-home therapy was 5 times her standard rate. A non-disclosure agreement was attached, thicker than the child's file. Her director placed the folder on her desk with a weary look. "This one is different, Alina. The family has specific expectations and resources. Say no and there are no hard feelings." But the clinical notes, what few there were, told a story Alina recognized. The boy was essentially non-communicative. He had no formal language foundation, signed or spoken. At 4 years old, he was already deep in the critical period where delays become deficits. She couldn't say no. The Conti compound was not a home, it was a fortress. Nestled behind high stone walls in the city's oldest, most discreet neighborhood, it was accessed through a wrought iron gate manned by 2 unsmiling men in dark suits. The first session was less an introduction and more a processing. Her car was met at the gate. She was escorted up the manicured drive, and her bag was politely but thoroughly searched. The house itself was a study in restrained opulence: cold marble, modern art, and a silence so deep it felt pressurized. She was led not to a family room but to a dedicated suite on the ground floor. It was a child's paradise, filled with expensive, untouched toys, and in the center, sitting on a plush rug, was Leo. He was a small boy with serious dark eyes, neatly dressed in a crisp shirt and shorts. He did not look up when she entered. A woman in a nurse's uniform stood stiffly in the corner. "I am Greta," she said, her accent Eastern European. "I care for Leo. His father will join you shortly." Alina knelt, placing her materials on the floor. She started simply with a brightly colored ball, rolling it toward him. Leo watched it roll past, making no move to touch it. For 20 minutes she tried every gentle tactic in her repertoire: cause and effect toys, simple picture books, playful vocalizations. Leo remained impassive, a closed system. Then the door opened. Alessio Conti filled the doorway. He was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with sharp features and hair silvering at the temples. His suit was impeccably tailored, but it couldn't disguise the physical power of the man or the watchful coldness in his eyes. This was not the anxious parent she was used to. This was a man assessing an asset. "Ms. Rossi," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried absolute authority. "You come highly recommended. Tell me what you see." Lina chose her words with clinical care. "I see a bright boy who has been in a quiet world for a very long time. He has no way to connect what he sees with meaning. No way to tell you what he wants or what he feels. That is not a cognitive issue. It is a language issue." Conti's gaze didn't waver from his son. "And you can fix this." It wasn't a question. I can give him language, Alina corrected gently. Whether that is signs, speech, or both, but I need time, and I need consistency. He needs to be immersed in communication every day. A flicker of something, impatience, perhaps frustration, passed over Conti's face. You have 3 months, whatever you need you will have, but there will be results. He turned to leave, then paused. You communicate with him only in this room. The observation window is there for a reason. He gestured to a mirrored panel on the far wall. We do not discuss our methods. We do not discuss my son outside these walls. Is that understood? The threat was velvet-wrapped but unmistakable. Alina simply nodded. As he left, she looked at Leo, who was now staring at the spot where his father had stood. The weight of the situation settled on her. She wasn't just teaching a child to communicate. She was trying to build a bridge in a house where every door was locked and every wall had eyes. The first month was an exercise in slow, painstaking excavation. Alina worked 3 days a week in the sterile playroom. Greta, the nurse, was always present, a silent sentinel who interacted with Leo only to meet basic needs, feeding, dressing, with minimal communication. Alina learned that Leo's mother had died when he was an infant. The household was one of masculine silence and rigid routine. She began by pairing everything with simple signs. Milk, more, book, ball. She'd say the word, make the sign, and offer the object. Leo's initial apathy slowly thawed into observation. He began to track her hands. Then one Tuesday, she held up a red ball and signed ball. She waited. Leo's eyes darted from her face to her hands. Slowly, his own small hand flexed. He didn't replicate the sign, but he reached for the ball. It was the first intentional, communicative gesture she had ever seen from him, a tiny crack in the dam. From that day, she incorporated basic tools. She used a tablet with simple sign language videos. She introduced picture exchange cards. Progress was measured in millimeters, but it was progress. She never saw Alessio Conti during sessions, but she felt his presence. Sometimes, she would notice the faint glow of a cigarette behind the observation window's tint. He was always watching. The breakthrough, when it came, was born from frustration. Alina had brought a picture book about families. She pointed to a drawing of a father holding a child. She signed Papa, then pointed to the door, a question in her eyes. Leo looked blank. She tried a different tack. She showed him a photo of her own father, signing Papa again. Nothing. At the end of the session, as she was packing, the door opened. Alessio Conti entered, not to observe but to collect his son. He stood in the doorway, his frame blocking the light. Papa is here, Leo, he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Leo's head snapped up. He looked from Alina to his father. And in that moment, Alina saw not a mob boss, but a man whose love for his son was a raw, frustrated, and isolated thing. It was a vulnerability he would never voice. He simply held out a hand. Leo stood and walked to him, slipping his small hand into his father's massive one. As they left, Conti glanced back at Alina. There was no smile, no thanks, just a brief, intense look of shared understanding. The goal was no longer abstract. It was this, a connection. That night, Alina reviewed her research with new urgency. She read studies on the psychosocial effects of language deprivation, on how deaf children in hearing families can become prisoners in plain sight. Leo wasn't just learning signs. He was learning he had a self that could be expressed. And she began to wonder what a man like Alessio Conti would do when that self finally spoke. The cliffhanger arrived 6 weeks in, disguised as routine. Alina was working with Leo on food signs: apple, cracker, juice. Leo was mimicking the shapes with increasing accuracy, a faint light of comprehension in his eyes. During a break, Greta left to fetch a snack. For the first time, Alina and Leo were truly alone in the room. Seizing the moment, Alina pointed to her own mouth, then made the sign for Mama. She showed him a generic picture of a woman. Leo stared. Then he did something he'd never done before. He initiated. He pointed to the observation window. Then he made a sign. It wasn't one Alina had taught him. It was crude, a child's approximation, but clear. He brought a fisted hand to his chest, then flung his fingers outward in a bursting motion. He did it again, pointing at the window, his face suddenly anxious. He was trying to tell her something about the person who watched, about his father. Before she could respond, the door swung open. Greta returned, followed not by Alessio, but by a man Alina had never seen younger, with a coiled tension and eyes that swept the room like a scanner. He looked at Alina, then at Leo, who had instantly shrunk back into his silent shell. "The boss wants a progress report," the man said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "Now in his study." As Alina followed him out, her mind raced. Leo hadn't just learned a sign, he had invented one. A sign for something he needed to say. And the fear on his face when he made it told her one thing with terrifying clarity. The most dangerous thing in this fortified house wasn't the security or the guns. It was the truth. A little boy was finally on the verge of speaking. The study was a different kind of room, dominated by a massive desk and the scent of leather and expensive tobacco. Alessio Conti stood by the window, his back to her. The younger enforcer who'd fetched her remained by the door, a silent blockade. "Report," Conti said without turning. Alina kept her voice clinical, steady. "He's progressing. He's starting to imitate signs for objects. Ball, apple, book. He's connecting symbols to meaning." Conti turned slowly. His expression was unreadable. "And the window, what was that?" So he had seen. Alina chose her next words as if walking on glass. "He was initiating, that's a huge step." He pointed to the window and made a gesture. It wasn't a standard sign, it was his own. Conti's eyes narrowed. "His own." "Children create signs when they don't have the words," she explained. "It means he has something to say. He's trying to tell me something about the person who watches." A heavy silence filled the room. Conti's gaze shifted to the enforcer by the door. A microscopic nod. The man left, closing the door behind him. They were alone. Conti walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a framed photograph. He placed it in front of Alina. It showed a beautiful woman with dark, laughing eyes holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. "Isabella," he said, the name sounding like a relic from a lost world. "She was hearing. We met at a charity concert. She was a pianist." He paused, collecting himself. "She insisted Leo be tested as an infant. She knew. She wanted to learn sign language to make sure he was never alone." He swallowed hard. "She died in a car accident when Leo was 8 months old. A brake line failure. It was not an accident." The admission hung in the air, a grenade with the pin pulled. "The men who did it are dead, but the families they worked for are not. My son is the heir to everything I've built and to every enemy I've made." His silence was a shield. "His voice will make him a target." Alina's mind raced, connecting the dots. The fortress, the guards, the observation. It wasn't just control, it was a siege mentality. Leo wasn't just language deprived, he was being deliberately isolated for his own protection. Conti leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "The sign he made, describe it." Alina demonstrated the crude motion, fist to chest, fingers bursting outward. Conti's face went pale. He closed his eyes for a long second. "In our family, when I was a boy, we had a sign for danger, for something that could hurt you from the inside. A heart attack. We called it the explosion inside." He looked at Alina, his guard completely down for the first time, revealing a raw paternal terror. "He's not afraid of me. He's afraid for me." That revelation changed everything. Alina left the compound that day with her mind reeling. The therapy was no longer just a clinical intervention. It was a minefield. Leo's first original thought was a warning. She threw herself into research with a new focus: trauma in deaf children. She read about how adverse childhood experiences could manifest as selective mutism, even in signing children. Leo's world wasn't just quiet. It was saturated with unseen tension, with whispered conversations and sudden movements from bodyguards. His language wasn't just delayed, it was frozen in a state of hypervigilance. At their next session, she changed her approach. She brought in picture cards of emotions: happy, sad, scared. She signed them with exaggerated facial expressions. Leo watched, captivated. When she held up the scared card, he didn't imitate the sign. He looked directly at the observation window and hugged himself. It was a confirmation. She began to incorporate safety and reassurance into their routine. A new sign, safe. She would make the sign, then gently stroke his back, a tactile anchor. She created a ritual at the end of each session, signing all done. Safe. Slowly, the defensive hunch in his shoulders began to soften. 2 weeks later, the external world intruded. Alina was leaving the compound when she noticed a dark sedan parked down the block, a different model from the usual security vehicles. A man sat in the driver's seat, seemingly on his phone, but his eyes tracked her car as she passed. A cold trickle of fear ran down her spine. That evening, her apartment doorbell rang. A deliveryman handed her a bouquet of white lilies with no card. Lilies. Funeral flowers. She called the only number she had for the compound, a secure line answered by a male voice. She reported the incident, her voice trembling. Within an hour, Alessio Conti himself called her cell phone. His voice was a low, controlled burn. "The flowers are from the Rossetti family. A reminder, they know about you, they know your role." "What do they want?" Alina whispered. "To unbalance me, to show they can reach what is mine." He paused. "From tomorrow, you will have a driver. Your routes will vary. You will not go directly home after sessions. Do you understand?" It wasn't a request. It was an order from a general in a war she hadn't signed up for. Yet she thought of Leo's fearful eyes, his invented sign. "I understand." The driver, a stoic man named Silvio, became a permanent fixture. Alina's life constricted into a secure bubble: home, clinic, Conti compound, a rotating series of safe routes. The weight of the situation was suffocating, but it forged a strange, silent alliance with Conti. He began to appear at the end of sessions, not behind the glass but in the room. He would watch, stone-faced, as Alina guided Leo's hands to form signs. One afternoon, she was teaching the sign for Papa. She gently took Leo's hand and helped him form the letter P tapped against his forehead. She then pointed to Conti. "Papa," she said aloud. Leo looked at his father, then at his own hand. He slowly, deliberately brought his own P to his forehead. It was shaky, but it was unmistakable. Alessio Conti, the man who commanded armies of silence, flinched as if struck. His breath caught audibly. He took a knee, bringing himself to his son's level. He reached out, his large, calloused hand hovering for a moment before gently cupping the back of Leo's head. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The emotion in the room was a physical force. In that moment, Alina saw the future Conti was fighting for, and it wasn't about business or power. It was this fragile, priceless connection. But the outside pressure was building. A week after the Lily incident, a news report broke about a federal racketeering investigation targeting a prominent city business consortium with alleged ties to organized crime. While no names were mentioned, the description pointed squarely at Conti's legitimate front operations. At the compound, the atmosphere turned electric with tension. Guards were doubled. Conversations were hushed. During a session, a sudden shout from the hallway made Leo jump and burst into silent tears, his small body shaking. Alina held him, signing safe over and over, her own heart pounding. That evening, Conti summoned her again. The study was now a war room. Maps and financial documents were spread across the desk. He looked exhausted, a new grimness setting into his features. "The timeline has moved up," he stated flatly. "The investigation is a feint. The real play is a takeover. The Rossetti family is making a move on my territories. They will hit hard and they will hit soon." He fixed his gaze on her. "I may need to disappear for a time to settle this. My mother will take Leo to our estate in Sicily. I need to know he can communicate with her. She knows some signs, but not enough. Can you accelerate the program?" Alina felt the floor drop away. "Alessio, you can't rush this. Language acquisition is a process. It's building a foundation. If you tear him away from his routine, from this environment is about to become a battlefield," he snapped, slamming a hand on the desk. Then he reined himself in, running a hand over his face. "I'm not asking for fluency. I'm asking for survival. Give him the signs to tell her he's hungry, that he's hurt, that he's scared. Give him a way to say he wants me." The raw plea in his voice broke through her professional resolve. She nodded. "I'll create a core vocabulary. A survival toolkit." For the next 72 hours, Alina worked around the clock. She distilled hundreds of signs down to 30. Help, hurt, scared, home, papa, nana, eat, drink, bathroom, sleep, sick, cold, hot. She made laminated picture cards for each with the sign illustration and the Italian word. She practiced with Leo intensively, drilling the signs with a calm she didn't feel. He was confused by the sudden shift, resistant to the pressure. Progress stalled. Then during a drill for the sign hurt, Leo became frustrated and threw the card. He signed the crude, bursting sign he'd invented weeks before the explosion inside. Then he pointed to Alina and then to the window where his father usually watched. His meaning was clear: "You are making my heart hurt." Where is Papa? It was a devastatingly sophisticated emotional expression. He wasn't just labeling objects, he was communicating complex inner states. It was the breakthrough they needed, born from the very stress they were trying to mitigate. The final session before the planned departure arrived. The compound was a hive of subdued activity. Suitcases were being loaded into armored vehicles. Conti's mother, a frail but fierce-looking woman in her 70s, had arrived from Sicily. She observed the session, her eyes missing nothing. Alina worked through the core vocabulary with Leo, who was clingy and anxious. At the end, as Alina was packing her materials, Conti entered. He dismissed his mother and Greta with a look. He knelt before Leo. "Listen to me, cuor mio," he said, his voice thick. "You go with Nana, be a good boy, I will come." He made the sign for Papa and then the sign for soon, which Alina had just taught them. Leo stared at his father's face, his own small features a mask of confusion and dread. He didn't sign back. He just launched himself into his father's arms, burying his face in his neck. Conti held him, eyes closed, his own composure crumbling for a single, unguarded second. Over Leo's shoulder, his eyes met Alina's. In them she saw a thank you, a goodbye, and a terrifying warning. He stood, handing Leo to his mother, who whisked him away. He turned to Alina. "Your work is done. The final payment is in your account. Silvio will take you home. Do not contact us. Do not come back here." He handed her a sealed envelope. "If anything happens to me, open this. It contains instructions and a consideration for your continued discretion." It felt like a severance, cold and final. "What about Leo's language?" she asked, her throat tight. "You gave him a start. That is more than I ever had." He turned to leave, then stopped. "That sign he made, the explosion, you were right. He was trying to tell me something. He was telling me that loving him was going to break my heart." And with that, he was gone. Silvio drove her home in silence. The envelope felt like a lead weight in her bag. Her apartment seemed foreign, empty. She had been ejected from the heart of a storm, left with only the echo of its violence. She tried to resume her normal clinic work, but the cases felt trivial. She watched the news obsessively. 3 days passed with no word, no headlines of violence. Then on the 4th night, her phone buzzed with a news alert. "Shooting reported in Financial District. 1 confirmed dead." The article was vague, but the location was a block from one of Conti's front companies. Her blood ran cold. An hour later, her intercom buzzed. She wasn't expecting anyone. She went to the panel, her heart hammering. "Yes, Ms. Rossi." The voice was strained, breathless. It was Silvio, the driver. "You need to come with me. Now, it's about the boy." Alina didn't hesitate. She grabbed her bag, the one that still held the envelope from Conti, and ran downstairs. Silvio's face was pale under the streetlight, a fresh cut above his eyebrow. The black sedan idled at the curb, passenger door open. "Get in, now." He peeled away from the curb before her door was fully closed, taking a series of sharp turns, his eyes constantly checking the mirrors. "What happened? Is it Alessio?" "The news said a shooting. The boss is alive," Silvio cut in, his voice tight. "But he's in surgery, multiple gunshots. It was an ambush outside the distillery. 2 of our men are dead. The Rossettis have made their move." Alina's hand flew to her mouth. "And Leo, his grandmother. They never made it to the airport. We had a decoy convoy. The real car was intercepted on the highway to the private terminal, a forced stop. We think it was an inside job. Someone gave them the route." He swerved onto an on-ramp heading out of the city. "They have the boy, Alina. They have Leo." The world seemed to tilt. All the security, the fortress, the plans undone by betrayal. Where are we going? To the only safe place left. The boss's contingency plan, and you're part of it. They drove for 45 minutes into the wooded hills north of the city, eventually turning onto an unmarked gravel road. It terminated at a modest, rustic-looking cabin. Inside, it was anything but rustic. The living room was a makeshift command center. Banks of monitors showed security feeds, some of them dark. A man Alina recognized as Conti's underboss, a wiry man named Carlo, was barking orders into a phone. He saw Alina and ended the call. "Rossi, good, you're the therapist." He didn't wait for confirmation. "We have a location, a Rossetti holding property, an old winery warehouse. Intel suggests they're holding the boy and the old woman there. We're mounting a recovery operation at 0400. He pointed to a chair. "Sit. You need to understand the dynamic." Carlo laid out a stark reality. The Rossetti family patriarch, Vittorio Rossetti, had a grandson who was also deaf. The boy, Marco, was 11. The family had poured money into the best oralist schools, demanding speech only, rejecting sign language. The result was a frustrated, isolated child with severe behavioral problems. "Vittorio sees Leo as a commodity," Carlo explained. "A proof of concept. If he can take Conti's air and fix him, make him speak, make him normal on his terms, it proves his methods, his strength. It's a psychological war. He doesn't just want to kill Conti's son, he wants to remake him in his own image." Alina felt sick. It was a perversion of everything she believed in, language as a tool of control, not connection. "You want me to go in with your men?" Carlo shook his head. "No, we want you to talk to the boss. He's conscious but critical. The doctors have him stabilized for now. He's demanding to speak to you. He's the only one who can call off the assault. If we go in guns blazing, the boy dies. If we negotiate, we look weak and they'll raise the price. The boss has a third option and it involves you, but you have to hear it from him." They drove to a private surgical clinic, a discreet brick building with no signage. The security was military grade. In a sterile room on the second floor, Alessio Conti lay in a bed connected to a web of monitors and tubes. He was deathly pale, his torso heavily bandaged, but his eyes were open and blazing with fury and pain. Silvio and Carlo waited outside. Conti gestured weakly for Alina to come closer. His voice was a shredded whisper. "You, open the envelope." She nodded. She had that night. It contained a bank slip for an obscene amount of money and a single line for Leo's future teacher: "Stay silent. The money is yours, no strings, but I need one more thing." He struggled for breath. "Vittorio Rossetti, he will want to gloat, he will bring Leo to me to show me his victory, to show me my son," speaking his words. He coughed, a wet, painful sound. "When he does, you must be there, you must be the one to interpret." Alina was confused. "Interpret what? Leo only knows a few signs, he can't." Conti's hand, bruised and IV-lined, gripped her wrist with surprising strength. "Not his words, his hands, his eyes. You taught him to communicate. Now I need you to listen. Listen for the truth behind whatever they make him say, and then, you must tell me what to do." He was putting the fate of his son and potentially his entire organization in her hands, based on her ability to read a 4-year-old nonverbal cues. The weight of it was paralyzing. "I'm a therapist, not a hostage negotiator." "You are the only person my son trusts outside of this room," Conti rasped. "And the only person in this world I trust right now. Carlo will arrange everything. You will be my medical translator for my deaf son." He sank back into the pillows, exhausted. The plan was insane. A high-stakes performance where the smallest flicker of fear on Leo's face could trigger a bloodbath. The call came at dawn. Vittorio Rossetti, a man with a voice like gravel, agreed to a humanitarian visit at the clinic. He would bring Leo to see his wounded father, no more than 2 bodyguards each. A temporary truce. Carlo's men scrambled to turn the clinic's sterile family lounge into a stage. Chairs were arranged. Security was positioned out of sight, but within seconds. Alina was dressed in scrubs, presented as a specialist brought in to facilitate communication. Her heart was a drum in her chest. At 10 a.m. they arrived. Vittorio Rossetti was a stout man in his 70s, with a groomed white beard and cold, calculating eyes. He held the hand of a sullen, overweight boy, his grandson Marco, who wore expensive hearing aids and glared at the floor. And behind them, held by a female Rossetti soldier, was Leo. He looked tiny, terrified, his clothes rumpled. His eyes darted around the room until they found Alina. A flash of recognition, then confusion. He didn't run to her, he just stared. Vittorio didn't bother with pleasantries. "Alessio, you look like hell. I brought your boy and mine. I thought we could have a talk about the future." He pushed Marco forward slightly. "Say hello to Mr. Conti, Marco." The boy mumbled something unintelligible, his words slurred and nasal, his eyes never leaving the ground. It was clear oralism had failed him. He had speech but no clear communication. Vittorio's smile was thin. He's come a long way. With the right discipline, they all do. He then turned to Leo. And this one, a blank slate, we've started his lessons already. He snapped his fingers. Leo, say hello to your father. A Rossetti guard behind Leo nudged him. Leo flinched. He looked at his father in the bed, then at Alina. His lower lip trembled. He opened his mouth. A strained, silent gasp came out. He tried again, his face contorting with effort. No sound. Vittorio's smile faded. He just needs more incentive. Conti from the bed spoke quietly. Let him speak his way. He looked at Alina and gave a slight nod. This was her cue. Alina knelt in front of Leo, blocking the Rossetti's view of his hands. She signed slowly and clearly. Hello, Papa, I am here. She pointed to Conti. Leo's eyes filled with tears. He shook his head, a tiny, frantic motion. He was too scared. Then he made a sign, not one she taught him. He tapped his own chest twice, then made a sweeping motion down his body. Then he pointed at Vittorio Rossetti's grandson, Marco. It was a description, me, same, him. He was identifying with the other deaf boy. He saw his own future. It was a moment of profound, heartbreaking clarity. Alina had to translate this into spoken words for the room. She stood, turning to Conti. He says, hello, Papa, I am scared. It was an interpretation, not a direct translation, but it was the truth. Conti's eyes never left his son. Tell him I am here and he is safe now. Alina signed the message. As she did, Vittorio Rossetti scoffed. This is what you want for him, this. Hand waving, my grandson can speak, he will speak. At the word speak, Marco, the 11-year-old, finally looked up. He saw Leo's hands moving. He saw Alina's responsive signs. A flicker of something yearning, envy crossed his face. Then in a sudden, shocking move, Marco Rossetti raised his own hands. He signed, clumsily but recognizably, the sign for help. He made it not to his grandfather, but to Alina. Then he pointed at Leo and made the sign for run. The room froze. Vittorio Rossetti's face purpled with rage. What did you do? He snarled at Alina, but the damage was done. His own grandson, the symbol of his method's success, had just betrayed its utter failure using the very language he despised. In that moment of chaos, Leo broke free from the guard's loose grip. He didn't run to his father. He ran to Alina, burying his face in her scrubs, his small hands clutching the fabric. He was shaking. The standoff was complete. Conti from his bed spoke into the tense silence. Vittorio, you have shown me your hand, and your heir has shown me his heart. You have nothing I want. Take your grandson and go. The territories you took are yours. The feud is over. It was a staggering concession. Carlo by the door looked like he'd been struck. Vittorio Rossetti was equally stunned than suspicious. You would give up half your city for this. Conti's gaze was fixed on his son, safe in Alina's arms. I am buying back my son's future, a future without your shadow. Now get out. It was a king's ransom paid in power for peace. The Rossettis left, the old man dragging his furious, signing grandson behind him. The moment the door closed, the energy bled out of the room. Leo finally pulled away from Alina and climbed onto his father's bed, careful of the tubes, and laid his head on Conti's uninjured shoulder. Conti's hand came up to cradle his son's head. He looked at Alina over Leo's dark hair. What did he really say when he first signed? Alina took a breath. He said, me. Same, him. He saw himself in the Rossetti boy. He saw the prison. Conti closed his eyes, a single tear tracking through the stubble on his cheek. Then I paid the right price. He opened his eyes, his expression shifting to one of grim determination. The war is over on the outside, but the real work begins now. I have to build a different kind of empire, one he can inherit without fear. He looked at Alina. I need your help to build it, not as a therapist on contract, as his guide. As part of this family, stay. It was more than a job offer, it was an adoption. Alina looked at Leo, who had lifted his head and was now watching her, his dark eyes clear for the first time, waiting for her answer. She thought of her empty apartment, her normal caseload, the safe, quiet life she could return to. Then she thought of the word Leo had never been able to say but had finally beautifully signed. Papa. She nodded. I'll stay. But as Carlo helped a weary Alessio Conti to sit up, as Silvio brought in a phone buzzing with urgent messages from the newly unstable territories, a chilling realization settled over Alina. Winning the battle for Leo's language was one thing. Winning the war for his soul in the world they were about to build would be another. And the most dangerous threats were no longer outside the gates. They were the compromises they would have to make to keep him safe. The compound Alina returned to was not the same fortress. The atmosphere had shifted from siege to something resembling, tentatively, a home. Alessio Conti recovered slowly, his physical strength returning faster than his ironclad control. The concession to the Rossettis had sent shockwaves through the city's underworld. Some saw it as weakness, others as a terrifying new calculus. Conti's remaining lieutenants, like Carlo, were bewildered but loyal. The business did not disappear, it evolved. Legitimate fronts were emphasized. The more volatile enterprises were quietly scaled back. The motivation was no longer expansion but consolidation and stability, a safe foundation for Leo. Alina's role transformed. She was no longer a contracted therapist with a 90-minute slot. She moved into the guest house on the property, becoming a permanent part of the ecosystem. Her days were structured around language immersion, but now it was for the entire household. She conducted daily lessons that included Conti, his mother, and even a rotating selection of trusted bodyguards. They learned not just nouns and verbs, but conversational phrases. How are you? What do you want? I love you. The kitchen, once a silent space, became a hub of clumsy signs and laughter as the cook learned to ask Leo if he wanted more pasta. The change in Leo was profound. With the constant threat removed and communication blooming around him, his anxiety melted away. The silent, watchful child became curious, even mischievous. His vocabulary exploded. He combined signs to make simple sentences. More juice, book read, Papa come. The sign for Papa was his anchor, used dozens of times a day. Conti, for his part, was a diligent but often frustrated student. His hands, used to issuing commands and wielding weapons, struggled with the fine motor skills of signs. But his determination was absolute. He practiced late into the night. Alina would often find him in his study, rehearsing finger placements with a focused intensity he once reserved for reviewing financial ledgers. The dynamic between father and son became the heart of the house. Their conversations were simple, slow, and breathtakingly sincere. One evening, Alina watched from the terrace as Conti sat with Leo in the garden. Leo was signing about a bug he'd seen. Conti listened, his entire being focused on his son's flying hands, then slowly signed back, "Bug is green." "Big," Leo nodded vigorously, signing "Yes, big," and spreading his arms wide. Conti smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that transformed his face. It was an ordinary moment. For them, it was a miracle. But the outside world did not vanish. The Rossetti truce was fragile, held together by Conti's perceived eccentricity and the sheer shock value of his surrender. There were still threats, business rivalries, and the ever-present scrutiny of law enforcement. One afternoon, Carlo brought news that a federal wiretap had been discovered on one of their legitimate shipping offices. The old Conti would have responded with immediate, aggressive counter-surveillance. The new Conti listened, then asked, "Is there a legal way to challenge it?" Carlo was speechless. Later, Conti explained to Alina, "Every war I fight is a lesson for my son." "What lesson is that?" "That the world is only conflict. I need him to see another way." It was not about going soft, it was about strategic legacy. The goal was no longer to be the most feared, but to be unassailable in a different way. To build walls of legitimacy, so high that Leo would never need to hide behind armed guards. Alina's own life was irrevocably changed. She had traded professional distance for deep, messy integration. She was part teacher, part translator, part confidant. Her relationship with Conti was a complex, uncharted territory. There was gratitude, a profound shared purpose, and an undeniable tension that hummed beneath their interactions. It was not romantic, not yet, but it was a bond forged in crisis, stronger than mere affection. He trusted her with his greatest vulnerability, his son's heart and mind. That trust was a heavier responsibility than any contract. The promised different kind of empire began to take tangible shape. Conti used a portion of his capital to establish a charitable foundation, not a mere front, but a fully operational nonprofit. Its stated mission was to provide resources for deaf and hard-of-hearing children from low-income families. It funded hearing aids, cochlear implants, and notably, sign language education for entire families. The foundation's board included respected audiologists and deaf community leaders. Alina was named Director of Language Programming. It was a masterstroke. It laundered his reputation not with money but with purpose. It created a public identity he could be proud to pass to his son. The first fundraiser was a black tie gala. Conti stood at the podium, Leo beside him holding his hand. He spoke not of business but of isolation and the power of connection. He introduced Leo as his inspiration. When he was done, Leo, without prompting, signed "Thank you" to the crowd. The room erupted in applause. It was a perfect piece of theater and it was utterly real. In that moment, Alessio Conti was no longer a mob boss. He was a philanthropist, a father. The transformation was complete. A year passed. Leo, now 5, was preparing to start kindergarten at a prestigious private school with a renowned inclusive education program. His language skills, both signed and spoken, he was now using a powerful hearing aid and beginning to vocalize some words, were age-appropriate. The observation window in the therapy room was removed. The room itself was converted into a bright, chaotic playroom. The final vestige of the old fortress was gone. One autumn afternoon, Alina was reviewing school transition plans with Conti in his study. Leo was playing on the floor with building blocks. Conti signed a question to his son about his tower. Leo signed back a detailed explanation. The conversation flowed naturally, a silent ballet between them. Alina watched, a sense of profound completion settling over her. The mission was accomplished. The boy in the silent prison was free. Conti noticed her expression. He dismissed Leo to the kitchen for a snack with his grandmother. When they were alone, he spoke. "You're thinking of leaving." It wasn't a question. Alina sighed. "My work here is done. He's ready. You're ready. The foundation has a full team." Conti nodded slowly. "The work you were hired to do is finished. But the work you started, that doesn't end. This family, it is your design as much as mine now." He stood, walking to the window overlooking the garden where their journey had nearly ended in a bloodbath. "I made a promise to build a world for him. I want you to see it built. Not as an employee, stay, as family." He turned to face her. "The foundation needs a permanent director. This house needs its interpreter. He stopped, uncharacteristically searching for words. "I need the person who taught my son to speak to help me learn how to listen." It was the most vulnerable request he had ever made. Alina looked around the study at the pictures of Leo on the desk, at the sign language charts pinned to a bulletin board next to financial reports. She thought of her quiet, empty life before. It had been safe. It had been small. This was vast, complicated, and dangerous in entirely new ways, but it was also alive with meaning. She thought of Leo's face when he signed Papa. She nodded. "I'll stay." Conti didn't smile, but the tension left his shoulders. He simply signed, "Thank you." The final surprising detail emerged months later, during a routine audit of the Foundation's outreach programs. Alina was reviewing grant applications when she came across one from a familiar name, the Marco Rossetti Support Fund. It was a small, newly established charity seeking funding for sign language tutors for deaf children in the foster system. The attached letter was from a social worker. It explained that after the very public breakdown at the clinic, Vittorio Rossetti had been incensed by his grandson's defection. Marco had been pulled from his Oralist school and essentially hidden away in shame. But the boy, having tasted genuine communication, had rebelled. With the help of a sympathetic aunt, he had secured a tutor. The charity was his idea, funded with his own trust fund. The letter included a photo. It showed Marco Rossetti, now 12, teaching a basic sign to a younger deaf child. He was smiling. In the corner of the photo, on a whiteboard behind them, someone had written a quote, "Language is not a gift, it is a right." The grant was approved immediately and anonymously. The cycle of isolation had been broken in 2 houses, not one. Conti's concession had not just saved his son, it had inadvertently liberated another. The story ends not with an ending, but with a new beginning. Alessio Conti, once defined by silence and violence, now measures his power in his son's growing vocabulary. Leo's first word, Papa, did not just break a silence. It dismantled an empire and built a new one in its place. The most dangerous man in the city was disarmed not by a rival's bullet, but by the graceful movement of a small, silent hand. And the therapist who was hired to fix a problem learned that sometimes the real therapy is not for the child in the silent room, but for the world outside, desperately needing to learn how to listen. The story of Leo and Alessio Conti is a dramatic fable, but it is built on a foundation of universal, scientific truth. The silent crisis facing over 90% of deaf children born to hearing parents is not one of malice, but of mismatch, a disconnect in the very medium of love and understanding. The emotional collapse of a powerful man behind a glass window is not just a moment of cinematic catharsis. It is the visual representation of a dam breaking. The dam of fear, of isolation, of a love that has no language. What the Conti story illustrates in its heightened reality is a principle backed by decades of research. Language is not a luxury. It is the infrastructure of the human mind and heart. Without it, we cannot know ourselves, and we cannot be known by others. Elena Rossi's intervention succeeded not because she used a special technique, but because she provided what every child in that situation desperately needs, an accessible bridge. For Leo, it was sign language. For another child, it might be speech therapy or cochlear implants paired with auditory training. The critical factor is not the modality, but the consistency, the immersion, and the unwavering belief that the child has something to say. The moment Leo signed Papa was not the end of a journey. It was the first step on a new one. It was the moment he stopped being a problem to be solved and became a person to be understood. The broader implication of this story extends far beyond one family. It asks a lingering question of all of us. Who in our own lives are we failing to understand because we haven't learned their language? This isn't just about deafness. It's about the countless ways we become isolated by experience, by trauma, by neurodivergence, by grief. We build our own observation windows, separating ourselves from those we cannot comprehend. The real work is not in fixing the person behind the glass, but in having the courage to walk into the room and sit with them, to learn their grammar of being. Alessio Conti traded an empire of fear for a kingdom of connection. In the end, the most valuable territory he conquered was the silent space between his heart and his son. That conquest required no weapons, only willingness. It is a choice available to any parent in any circumstance. To listen, not for the words we expect, but for the truth being communicated in whatever form it arrives. If this exploration of silence, language, and the unexpected places where humanity breaks through has resonated with you, there are more stories like it waiting. The channel is dedicated to unearthing the profound narratives hidden within the human condition. For deeper dives into the science of communication, the psychology of family, and the true stories that inspire our greatest fictions, make sure to subscribe. Your support allows us to keep bringing these intricate tales of connection and consequence to light. Thank you for listening. Until the next story.